athlete, whether they have 1,000 followers or they have 20,000 followers, have active, engaged audiences. So it's just taking the time to really think about who these people are and who their audience is, and finding someone whose audience matches your business, and then going from there.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Test, Optimize, and Scale. I'm excited to have Ariel Feigenbaum here with us today, co-founder and CEO of PeakNIL, going to be speaking about the sports world today. Names, likeness, going to have recommendations for athletes, how to launch brands, and relationships as a whole. Ariel, thanks for taking the time to hop on the podcast here.
Hey, nice to see you, Jason. Thank you so much. I am the Chief Operating Officer, not the CEO of PeakNIL. As much as I would love to be, our CEO, Greg, is amazing and actually single-handedly built the whole product himself. So can't steal the credit there. But thanks so much for having me.
My pleasure. My pleasure. Enjoyed our conversations at Investment Week and learning more about what you do and both sides of the marketplace. Had to have you on. Looking forward to creating content around it, and thought we could start with your story, your background, and what led you into the world of NIL.
Yeah, for sure. So it's interesting. Everyone has a different story about how they've come to work in the sports space. And mine, I didn't start there in a lot of ways. I went to UConn and loved college basketball. I was there at a time when we won both the men's and women's national championships in 1 year. So sports has always just kind of been ingrained in me. But when I graduated, I actually got the job that like every girl dreams of. I was an assistant at Estee Lauder. So literally the Devil Wears Prada came out and I was living it day to day. And it was amazing. I learned true traditional marketing from a company that does it the best. But it was a really interesting time because it was when Facebook and Twitter and all of these social media companies were starting to pop up and actually engage companies and brands and say, how do you tell your story on social media and not just connect with friends on these tools? So what I ended up doing was leaving Estee Lauder and going to work for a social media marketing agency called, at the time, it was Mr. Youth, because we were doing youth marketing, because social media was all about college kids at the time. But over the years, we grew up with the technology and became R.O.I. Now they're owned by Publicis. And what I did was own social media strategy and kind of content creation and execution for brands like Neutrogena, Pepperidge Farm, Old Navy, Caesars Entertainment, all this really fun projects to be launching on social media. And it was around the time leading up to the London Olympics in 2012, and we won the visa business. And I ran into my boss's office and said, I'm obsessed with the Olympics. Please let me work on the Olympics campaign. And I dropped all my other clients, and I've been working in sports ever since. I helped Visa launch social media as a consumer marketing tool at the London Olympics, literally sitting in the stands watching, Misty May and Kerry Walsh win the gold medal because they were Visa athletes, sitting there with my phone, writing the tweets from the stands while cheering and freaking out because, back in 2012, we didn't have all of these tools to write the content and manage the content. We had a room full of 30 people sitting in a conference room pretty much 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, rotating, creating, and approving Olympic content and NFL content. So that's how I got into sports. And I just loved it so much. Through working with Visa, I got to work with the athletes to create a ton of content. We were traveling, doing NFL campaigns, Olympic campaigns. And this is where this love for working with the athletes and pairing them with brands kind of got developed. And I think how I ended up in NIL, because I've been brewing on this idea for so many years, since like 2012, of how do we create really authentic ways for athletes to partner with the brands that they're working with? There's only so much paying someone to smile and tap their credit card that you can do, as opposed to, anyone who understands influencer content knows that the content is just so much more genuine when it's about a product and a message that actually comes from the athlete, as opposed to our lines that they're given that they need to memorize. They're self-conscious, they're nervous, and it's not their true self. So over the years, I've worked with these athletes. I've worked with MLS athletes, with baseball players, and it's always been this question for me of how do we create a really good environment where the athletes feel that they have ownership over their partnerships and over the messages. And ultimately, I got approached by our founder, Greg, at PeakNIL, and he showed me what he built and what he was doing and kind of explained the story of how he was so motivated and inspired by the NIL space. And it kind of was like this aha moment for me of, wait, this is everything I've kind of been trying to piece together. And now I can be part of building a tool that empowers athletes to kind of be their own agents in the space.
Absolutely. And I want to talk about that problem a bit more and what PeakNIL solves. But just going back, found your passion for sports at UConn, Estee Lauder, starting to get into the social agency world, working with big brands, felt a magnetic pull towards the Olympics and being involved in brand activations at that point. And like you mentioned, that relationship between athletes and brands is a big deal. I can recall commercials I saw in the 90s and some of my favorite products and how they're introduced to me from athletes and how that authenticity felt like it was there, but that becomes tougher and tougher as you get to different tiers of athletes, as you get to different tiers of brands, or even just to have that organic feeling. And in the world of social media, where we're inundated with posts and content and advertising, what is the big obstacle today for athletes? And starting to get into the world of college sports, even just managing brand relationships, let alone setting out to seed the right partnerships and have it something that's in line with their personality, with their audience.
Yeah, the biggest challenge off the bat for student athletes is time. They are students first, they are athletes second.
Yes.
And already that takes up all of their time. They don't have time to get jobs like most students. They're not working at a restaurant waiting tables to get their spending money. They are usually at practice in the morning. They go to class, they go to practice, and then they study. And then they do it all over again, or they're on the road doing those things. So I think the biggest challenge that I've found when speaking to student athletes, especially about the NIL space, is the immense pressure to be a content creator. They, are worried about finding the time to do that, finding the skills. This isn't something that someone teaches you in your college classes or in high school. You kind of either have it and work on it and want to dedicate the time, or you don't. And I've really taken that to heart when we built PeakNIL and really have made sure that we're educating athletes that offline opportunities are just as beneficial and can be financially beneficial for them as being a social media influencer. So, 60% of NIL deals are done on social media. You think about paying an athlete to promote your product on an Instagram post. That's a lot of pressure for the rest of the athletes who don't have these major followings. They don't have the funds to be paying a media agency. Livy Dunn's not sitting there with her phone creating her content. She has people that help her do this that she pays. And that's, the 1%, but everyone else needs to figure out how to do this themselves. But from a time perspective, there's so many other ways they can use their time and still benefit from their NIL. So it might be autograph signings. It might be supporting a product while they're doing sampling at a grocery store, signing autographs at a car dealership. Or my new favorite one is if you're a great golfer go offer to golf in corporate foursomes. Like,
Yes.
people love bragging. They love being good at golf at corporate events. Like, if I was an NCAA golfer, that's the first thing I would do is call every like construction company in the area and be like, I'd love to come golf with your clients and make them look good. So it's really this like, because NIL is so much in its infancy, it hasn't been a ton of thinking out of the box yet in terms of how to bring it to life. And I think that that's the biggest challenge that these student athletes are facing right now, and that the industry is facing is, brands see big companies spending a lot of money and don't think it's for them. And athletes see, the stars creating this incredible content and don't think that they're good enough. And what's happened is such a small piece of the NIL economy has been made like available to people. And what we're really looking to do is blow up and open the doors and just invite brands and influencers and athletes of all sizes to participate in the economy, because that's ultimately the biggest challenge that we see is just access.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And taking down those curtains, showing how it's all working. I get to work with the brands quite a bit, not specifically for athletes, but celebrities, musicians, anyone with a large social following. And they get incorporated into advertisements, into organic content, into various types of activations. We're generally seeing brands ask about audience size, engagement. We work with a lot of startups. Unfortunately, marketing is more performance oriented with startups than with bigger brands who have more time and have different branding metrics towards the end of the year. So different types of returns. I love how you brought up the golf example. I just started playing in golf tournaments myself. And that's been a big component, is having former professional athletes as well as up and coming professional athletes there, let alone joining your groups. I've seen more expensive tournaments where they have comedians and athletes as part of your group. So I think that's such a great idea, and creates that personalized experience, because then if they played with me, I'd be talking about it with my friends. Hey, guess who I played with? And let me tell you, they can golf. I would be able to have that story and have it continuing on, which I know brands are always looking for. What do you see on the brand side? We're talking about a bit on the athletes, but what do you see on the brand side? What are they seeking out? What does success look like for them? And what do those conversations look like?
Yeah. I mean, NIL is like in its Wild West phase. Brands are just starting to scratch the surface of even exploring it. And that's big brands. I've spoken to brands that you would just instinctively think are in the NIL space. And they're like, I don't know if I'm ready for that. Like, we're not really sure how to test it and prove it. And ultimately, they need to prove ROI. And what we look at from the brands is, yes, ROI for a big company is important, but it's really easy to drive ROI for small businesses. And that's where we think that there's a huge untapped opportunity with the NIL space, is getting small businesses to work with local athletes to support their businesses. Because if you're Vinny's Pizza and you're slinging, 2-for-1 slice night on game days, let's say you sell 200 slices a day typically, and the star quarterback comes in and all of a sudden you double your business on game day. Like, that's a big ROI all of a sudden. Like, it might have only cost you $50 to get the kid from a Division II or Division III school, and all of their fans, the majority of them, live within 10 to 20 miles of your business. So our hypothesis, and what I'm testing through our campus ambassador program, is this fact that we're going to be able to drive a much more significant ROI with smaller businesses. Versus on the flip side, I think why some of the bigger brands are struggling with conceptualizing NIL is college sports is ultimately a hyper local fandom. I live in the Bay Area. I don't really care who the star quarterback is at Florida. Like, I'm aware of it. I watch college football, but that's not someone that's going to drive me to make a decision on a business. I might not even recognize them if I'm a lay consumer who's not really into college sports. But if I am, a retail store, let's say a big national one, and I'm opening at a mall that's 10 miles from campus, and I invite some student athletes and have them bring their friends to our store opening and drive some buzz, all of a sudden I'm able to see ROI. So I think that brands need to start thinking about taking a step back from using NIL for national campaigns and really at least dip their toe in the water first from like a hyper local perspective. Because I think that they'll get a lot more bang for their buck that way.
Proximity has power to it. I live in Marina Del Rey in Los Angeles, and if an advertisement says Marina Del Rey, I'll pay more attention. School in Santa Barbara. I've actually done a lot of work with the universities here in Los Angeles and the entrepreneurship programs. So I think of individuals and pay extra attention to anything around LMU, UCLA, USC, mentioning all of them in the same sentence, even with rivalries. And it definitely draws me out and wants to have me get more involved. Like you said, I may not pay as much attention. I may think it's neat, but not read in as much depth if it's somewhere cross country. And local marketing campaigns, having experience there, like you said, they can be much quicker towards results. And love some of the examples you gave around in-person events and activations. Want to familiarize the audience a bit more with NIL. Names, image, likeness. Why NIL? Can you give us some stats around it? Can you talk about some recent events and achievements around it? I know this was not as much of a topic, especially in the academic sports community in college sports years back. Why NIL right now?
Yeah, so as of 2 years ago was the first time that student athletes in the college space were able to monetize their name, image, and likeness. 3 years ago, you couldn't take an athlete for a cup of coffee without risking their college eligibility. So this is a really big deal. And anyone who follows the much larger political kind of conversation of our NCAA athletes, employees, should they be making a salary for playing on the teams? That's a whole can of worms that I'm not even going to open because we could talk about that just for an hour, Jason. But ultimately, it's such a big deal because this is the first time that these student athletes are being able to be tapped into from brands. College sports are the number one, if you group them all the sports together, have a higher viewership than the NFL, than Major League Baseball, than the NBA. So it really is the every person's league. So there's always been this major fandom, but there's never been a real way for brands to utilize them in a safe way and use them for marketing. So now that that's legal, brands are really just starting to figure out what that means, how to do it. Student athletes are kids. They're, 18 to 23, 24-year-olds. And they're also not the most professional all the time. They don't have the training. Most of them don't have agents that are making sure that they're sharing the brand message. So there's this really give and take of the brands learning to trust the athletes and the athletes getting educated on what's actually expected of them if they want to monetize their name, image, and likeness. But, in the past 2 years, we've seen a really steady increase in business. And I believe the stat is in the next year, so year 3 of NIL, brands are expected to spend over $1 billion in NIL deals. The money is not only going directly to the athletes into their pockets through tools like ours, but also through this process called collectives, where high net worth donors get together and kind of pool their money and then do NIL deals. So at PeakNIL, we both work directly with the athletes who want to do their own deals. And then we're in the process of launching a collective portal so that collectives can actually have a standardized way that's tax compliant, NCAA compliant, all sorts of compliant to work with these athletes and kind of keep it above board. And that's just the beginning of it. I mean, when you think about where the value is from the students of NIL, this is their time to shine. Less than 2% of NCAA students end up going pro. So they have 4 years right now, if just in college, to make money off of the fact that they're, a professional athlete. Some of them might have a few years after graduation where people still care. And the cool thing is 34 states, I believe, right now have passed it so that high school students can start doing this, which is wild to me. You think of states like Florida and Texas where football is life. And it's crazy to me. Texas is actually one of the only states that hasn't passed high school NIL yet because they're still working through all the policies for it, because football is such an important thing for them that they don't just want to open up the floodgates without having a real plan. So it's this really interesting time where these student athletes are aware that they're able to make money, but no one's really, until recently, given them the tools to figure out how to do it themselves. I get calls all the time from student athletes being like, okay, I signed up for a PeakNIL. Like, how do I get paid? And I'm like, this is like a tool that you use to do business. And they're like, oh, like I have to do things. And I'm like, yeah, it's not an allowance. Like, you're working with businesses and there's a lot of education that's needed. And, at PeakNIL, we're not an education company. I always say you don't go to Venmo to learn financial literacy. We strategically partner with education companies. There's a ton of great organizations out there working with athletic departments to educate these kids, because the sooner we can educate them, the longer and higher their earning potential is going to be over time.
I think it's all about education. What's the old saying? Give a man a fish, teach a man to fish, feed him for a day, feed him for a lifetime. And you read books, you watch interviews from some of the top, most successful athletes of all time, and they had someone in their corner who was advising them on how to work with brands, how to manage their own likeness. And I think giving the athletes the tools to do this and think in this direction early on is absolutely massive. I definitely feel they should be compensated, and they're taking different, that they're creating a lot of value for different organizations. I'm not saying where or how, like you said, it's a political topic, but I think it's such a great idea. And as a marketer, to connect the brands and the athletes. And I gave some experiences when I was skateboarding as a kid and how sponsorship worked in that world. And we look at even, let's say, the music community. And these days, how your online audience can almost mean more than the quality of your product in many cases. But that work into the marketing, building, nurturing these social communities. So being able to set up athletes to do so. And with that most precious resource, as emphasized, being time, reduced or at least made more impactful with the tools at PeakNIL. I think it's perfect timing. As you mentioned, we're a couple years in now, going to be over $1 billion next year, more brands, more athletes all entering in. So getting education on both sides for how to run these campaigns effectively. So it's a win on all sides of the table, with the consumers, with the audience participating as well.
Yeah. And the thing that we're doing that's different than a lot of our competitors is we're a two-way marketplace. So not only do we tell the athletes, great, put yourself on this platform, make a profile, and hopefully someone will come find you, And then these kids are like, but I only have 2,000 followers. No one's ever going to find me. But that doesn't mean that I'm not passionate and I'm not worthy of working with. I sweat on the field just as hard as the guy who has 20,000 followers.
Yep.
So what do I do? And so what we actually did to solve for that is build a two-way marketplace so that athletes have the ability to pitch themselves to brands and say, hey, Chevy, I got a Chevy when I turned 16. My dad's driven a Chevy my whole life. My parents went on their first date in a Chevy. I'm a diehard. Here's why I think you should have me come sit in your Chevy dealership and, represent your brand or do some content. And maybe we'll charge you $20 to do it because I don't have a ton of followers, but it lets the athletes when we say like own your hustle, like we want to create that drive for these students and that business mind early on. So, I keep telling so many of our athletes, like, this should go on your resume. Your NIL deals are work experience. Like, by doing NIL deals, you are becoming a marketer. By working with this, like, this is your job now. And yes, being a student is your job, first important job. Being an athlete is your second. But if you're going to do these NIL deals, you're raising your hand and saying that you're a marketer now. So just like you would with any other job, you're going to train yourself to do it. You're going to get the tools you need to do it well, and you're going to practice doing it, and you're going to ultimately get better over time. You started as an assistant at Estee Lauder for a reason. You're not going to be the vice president right after out of college. And I think athletes need to remember that as well, is you're going to start slow with NIL. You're not going to get $1 million deal the first deal that you do. You're going to need to build the muscle. You're going to need to practice the content just like any other job. And eventually you're going to work your way up and hopefully become more successful with time.
And being able to reference big brands that you've worked with in the past speaks very loudly, even if it's for the next NIL deals. I know if we had an employee applicant that had that type of background, it would immediately stand out to us. I think that stretches way beyond the world of marketing and is not limited just to that space. And I could tell you as a consumer, if I followed a local athlete, I could still tell you some of the high school football players, college football players when I was growing up. I could remember them by name. If they were representing a local car dealership, it would definitely influence my buying process, if not end decision. And we project ourselves onto these athletes. We find commonality to identify with. I think that's why athletes are so effective in brand marketing, and that relatability, especially at the high school and college level, and how that differentiates from, in many cases, pro athletes. So I really think it's an avenue that's only going to get wider and wider and have more people involved in these years to come.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, student athletes are literally people in your community. It's a way for local businesses to connect with their community. It's a way for the athletic departments to connect with their community. This has been something that athletic departments have always done, is, local sponsorships, but now it lets the brands make the relationships directly with the athletes, who are the consumers and are friends with the consumers and eat with the consumers. So it really just brings the world in a little bit tighter. And I always say, it's that really nice intersection of like community, purpose, and business. You can kind of do all of those things at once if you're thinking about your NIL properly.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I just keep thinking about it from our campaigns, and the more social proof, the more third-party validation we can put into an advertisement, into a content marketing funnel, the better. The more trust we could establish, the more social proof as a whole. Hey, look who's buying, going, using this product, this app, the better. So being able to have that marketplace, to streamline the process, to be able to make it more straightforward, because it's difficult. I imagine from the athlete side, from the brand, to reach out to a bunch of people over Instagram, or take all these different steps. If it syncs up, and we've seen platforms like this for influencer marketing. Big fan of Cameo on the celebrity side and getting personalized messages. I've sent them to friends for birthdays. They have brand programs. So to be able to have this specific for name, image, and likeness, and again, to be able to give the education. Had mentioned some different athletes that we work with. Actually worked on a campaign for Mayweather boxing and fitness, and Floyd Mayweather was very specific about his likeness over the years, knowing the value and the equity it would carry years later. There's many other athletes who, again, had the right mentors, had the right partnerships, had the right people on their team, their camp, to be able to take the right direction with their brand. I think we've all seen athletes, or I should say celebrities, other types of notable figures who seem to put their name on everything. So also doing it in a very authentic way to one's personal brand and long term, even beyond sports.
Yeah, exactly. And, so many of these big athletes have agents who bring them their deals. And ultimately, most student athletes don't have that. 60% of NCAA athletes are Division II and Division III athletes. They're not the ones that you're watching on, football on the weekends on TV at the bar with all your friends. And they're not the ones that are getting the big agents. But with tools like PeakNIL and with all of these NIL marketplaces that are popping up, it empowers them to have the opportunity. Ultimately, I always remind the athletes, we're not an agency. We are not your agent. We are not bringing you the brands. We are putting the athletes and the brands in the same room and giving you both the tools to be successful with each other. So, you were talking about Mayweather. Like I was joking, we're the tool that let the grill company find George Foreman. If he didn't have an agent, they would have been able to find each other at PeakNIL. And that's really what we're doing, is creating really strong tools that empower both sides of the deal to do the deal in a really frictionless way, because we want as many people as possible who want to participate to be able to do those deals and not have price and marketing prowess become the barrier to entry.
And when I was in school, not to date myself too much, everyone had a George Foreman grill because it was George Foreman's grill.
Oh yeah. I had one in my first apartment in Brooklyn. That was like the only way I knew how to cook my chicken, I think.
Yeah.
It was on the Foreman grill.
Absolutely. And hearing him talk about the health benefits and the process, again, you just you digest it in a more consumable fashion, able to repeat it to your friends when they come over and talk about how great it is. It works. There's a reason that brands use athletes. It's great that you're setting up athletes with these tools. Per the title of the show, Test, Optimize, Scale. If I'm an athlete or if I'm a brand, what are the best ways to begin to test this types of marketing? What are the best approaches and methods to be able to get into this world of NIL?
Yeah, I think from a test perspective, the biggest thing is just being willing to dedicate a small amount of marketing dollars to do that. Just test it. There's no need to secure a ton of money, create a big campaign the first time you're doing it. Don't put the pressure on yourself. Pick a few smaller athletes, think about what you're trying to achieve, and run a few small tests. Use trackable links, give people referral codes, use different call to actions and test them with different athletes and see what does deliver that ROI for you. And I think at least what I've seen is every athlete, whether they have 1,000 followers or they have 20,000 followers, have active, engaged audiences. So it's just taking the time to really think about who these people are and who their audience is, and finding someone whose audience matches your business and then going from there. So the nice thing is much unlike most of our competitors, we don't charge a monthly subscription fee. So you don't have to have $500 a month dedicated to this. Take your corporate credit card and spend $50 once and see how it goes. And if you like it, do it again. Do it again. Try a bigger athlete. We have that nice flexibility of try before you buy a little bit, of just come on and browse. Like, we don't charge you anything to be there. We don't gate lock any of our athletes. As a brand, you have full access to view and engage with any of our athletes because there's no benefit to us. We want as many people as possible to be working together. And then on the athlete side, I think it's the same thing. It's get beyond the idea that you're nervous, you're not a great content creator, and just start creating your own content. You don't even have to have a brand yet. You might use the same face wash every year since you were in college. Just practice creating content around it and maybe tag the brand in it and see if they're interested in working with you, and just start testing your styles. I always tell athletes who are like, I hate my voice, I don't want to be in videos. I'm like, then make content with your dog. People love dogs. I was hiking with my dog and was like making Yellowstone references. You could really find such creative ways to create content that's not just you holding up a product feeling awkward if you really stop and think. And that's what I really, from a test perspective, think is the best call for these student athletes is just practice, test, see what works. And, the numbers kind of speak for themselves.
They really do. And if you go in knowing what metrics you want to get, hey, I want to work with X amount of brands over a given period of time, or as a brand, want to be able to see this type of engagement, searching athletes within a given radius and being able to put something together. By the way, those are very approachable tests.
Yeah.
We see on the influencer side much larger bills at some point, and we're always looking for the engagement levels and are in many cases more interested in higher volumes of smaller influencers, content creators, athletes than larger, but with a less responsive audience. If that percentage is, under 10,000 likes on 1 million followers, it's under 1% engagement. You may see, exponentially higher percentages on smaller pools, and then being able to use more of a network of athletes. I think some of the groups you were mentioning earlier have the right idea in that regard. How do you optimize? And when I say optimize, what if you're a brand and you're not hitting your KPIs, your key performance indicators right out of the gate, whether it's performance, whether it's sign up, some type of engagement metric you're looking at, or you do see something working, maybe working with 5 different athletes, 1 or 2 of them are working better for your product. What are the best approaches to optimize? And I guess on the athlete side, if you're not getting the best responses from brands at first, what are the best approaches to pivot and be able to manage to a point of effectiveness?
Yeah. So I think from an optimized perspective, one of the biggest things that we're anticipating is the brand's ability to communicate what they want to the athletes in a way that the athletes understand. So if you're typically working at an agency on a marketing team, what do? You write a marketing brief. So what we've done is build out a really basic hand-holding version of a marketing brief that the brands fill out for the athletes. So I think a lot of the onus is on the brands to really clearly articulate what it is that they're looking for these athletes to do. What are the expectations? What does success look like? What are the do's and don'ts? And I think that that's going to be one of the best ways that brands can learn to optimize their NIL. I've looked at a ton of our competitors and how their user experience goes. And most of them just give an empty box that says, what do you want the athlete to do? And if you're like me, a ex-agency person, you copy and paste a marketing brief into it. If you're a small business owner who's never done that, you write a few sentences and hope for the best. And then when the content isn't right, you're frustrated and confused. So what we've done is eliminate any room for error there and built in a really clear marketing brief that is meant to have a college kid go, oh, what is the call to action? They want me to tell people to come into the store. Don't talk about our competitors. Do eat the pizza in the pizza place. Don't get takeout. Whatever it is, so that the brand is assured that they're getting the content that they feel good and pay for, and hopefully hits their strategy. Because that's going to be the first thing, and where a lot of the brands have a lot of hesitation of working with these student athletes is, do I trust these kids to represent my brand? So by taking the onus and optimizing their brief, I think that's a really big piece of it. And then from the student athlete side, I think the biggest way that they're going to have to optimize is their professional communication. How do you communicate with a brand? How are you, putting your business face forward as you're a brand, you're the agent, you're the client, you're the product, how do you articulate who you are and what you care about and why you bring value? And we understand that not every, 18 to 23-year-old is the best at this. So what we've done is actually integrate a lot of AI plugins that help the student athletes write their about me's, write their briefs. So it might say, I want to pitch myself to Chevy. They're going to get a document to fill out that says, why do I want to work with you? Why is this important to me? What is my creative idea for working with you? And then AI can pull that into an actual professionally written letter to a brand marketer. So what we're trying to do is give everyone the tools to kind of just keep making themselves a little better, because at the end of the day, just like in a lot of marketing, even if it's an agency to a client, clear communication is like 90% of the problem. So by removing as much of that friction as we can, we're hoping that both sides of the party are able to just kind of keep optimizing towards better communication with each other.
That's amazing. I could picture if the brands we work with were receiving that. I could picture from the athlete side. What about once it is working? What are the best approaches towards scale? Any examples, or you're seeing the results come through, even if they're more branding associated? How do you take it to the next level and ramp things up from there?
Yeah, I think from a brand perspective, it's find what works and do more of it. So if getting autograph signings is bringing people in the door, try different types of athletes. Diversify your client base based on who is following a baseball player versus football player versus swimmer. They all have very unique audiences. So kind of finding that approach that works for you and then replicating it is definitely going to help brands scale. And I think also thinking beyond the basketball and football players is also going to be really helpful in helping brands scale. Brands instinctively kind of say, who has the biggest following? Who do people know and care about the most? And it tends to, unfortunately, be the basketball players and the football players, which leads all of these other athletes that are kind of untapped gems overlooked. And in order for brands to start scaling in NIL, they're going to have to look at who are the other athletes in the other sports and realize that there's all these followers and consumers and fans that aren't following the basketball and football players. A lot of it being the female audience. A lot of brands are looking to speak to female consumers. NIL is definitely very heavily male skewed at the moment. And there is going to be this, reckoning of, if you're a consumer facing brand that speaks to women, you're an apparel company, you're a beauty product, you're a food and beverage company, a health food store, there's a huge market there. And those women are not playing football and they're not necessarily following the football players, but they might love women's volleyball if you're in Nebraska, or they might be the gymnastics team, which has the female fans. So it's, in order to scale, brands are going to have to look past the numbers sometimes of a follower count and think about kind of what you were saying, the actual density of engagement to your audience, and saying, they're not the flashiest, but they might be a whole lot more effective. Yeah. And I think that that's going to be a lot of scale. And for the athletes, to be honest, I don't know if scale is the ideal outcome, is necessary. These kids, they're students first, they're athletes second, and their NIL deals should be coming third. It should be a way to make some cash, pay the bills, save for the future, and ideally create something that you can maintain and learn and grow off of after graduation. And maybe that's when scale comes. But right now, there's only 24 hours in a day. These kids need to be they have so much to focus on that, even if they're just doing 2 or 3 NIL deals a month, that's a game changer for these kids who can't have part-time jobs on campus. I remember being in college and $20 in my pocket went a really long way.
Oh, yeah.
And that might have, if someone were to pay me to do a Facebook post for $20, like you can get a decent amount done in a month. So I think that it's going to be really interesting to see the scalability of it from an athlete perspective, at least per athlete. I think instead what you're going to see is more and more athletes becoming educated and proficient in the space. Right now, such a small percentage of these athletes are, but I think that number is going to scale. I think that they're going to see their friends doing it. They're going to see their friends being successful. And what we're banking on is there's going to be this flywheel. It's just typical influencer marketing. One athlete sees another athlete doing something and they want in on the action. And what we're hoping is that as a group, they can get together and rise and help lift each other. And that's where the scalability is going to be from an athlete perspective.
I could definitely see that happening. And I actually watch some golf YouTubers that are college golfers. Some of them are guests on other channels, but I would just add to that too. Just keep creating more content and with higher level guests, higher level content collaborators. I actually have seen some of the most creative concepts from individuals in that age group. I actually think as a marketer, a lot of my best ideas were around 22. But I've been to influencer houses here in Los Angeles for brand campaigns. I'm not cool enough to hang out there, but I've had to be there on behalf of clients. And it's very professional, a lot of content, production taking place. Not what you'd picture from a college crowd in terms of a get together and party. Meanwhile, all different types of brand activations and contracts and things like that are occurring. So it's so great that you guys are making this platform available for all sides of the table, and especially on the athlete side to be able to give that education. Like you mentioned, only 2% move on to pro careers. To be able to start working on working on collaborations with brands and behalf of brands in some cases is really huge. And I want to be able to point everyone to PeakNIL. I want to be able to point to the funnel. If there's more information that they're seeking out or looking to get in contact with you, what are the best ways for them to do so? And what are any final thoughts you want to leave listeners along with that direction?
Yeah, for sure. So anyone who's interested in checking us out can go to peaknil.com. If you are a fan or a brand, you create a user account and you can start doing deals with athletes. And if you're an athlete listening to this, bravo on you for getting your business acumen early, and go create an athlete profile. The best way to get a hold of me is email. I'm Ariel@peaknil.com, or you can find me on LinkedIn, Ariel Feigenbaum. And, I just want to thank you so much, Jason, for having this conversation, for letting us, tell our story about what we're building at PeakNIL. I'm obviously very passionate about this. I could talk about this much longer and invite anyone who wants to have the conversation, explore, is this right for your brand? How do you test it? I have a million creative ideas of how brands can do NIL deals, and I'm giving them away for free. So shoot me a note and I'd happily share my creative ideas with you guys anytime.
Awesome. And I would definitely recommend listeners to take Ariel up on that invitation and get the right launch for, whichever route you're taking. If you're the athlete, if you're the brand, I know a lot of founders listening. I would definitely get in talk with Ariel about that. And Ariel, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to hop on the pod today. This is a new topic we have not covered on the podcast yet. I know audiences are going to love it. So I want to tell you how much I appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
Great. Really love the conversation. Thank you everybody for tuning in. We will see everyone next time. Take care.